and then.
How do I do that?
Yeah, just leave it like this. It's okay.
Leave it like that. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so just you don't have to talk
hello,
about that whole thing.
We are live, Ben. Hi, hello everyone. Great to have you here in this panel. Welcome everyone. So this is a panel discussion on convergence, economic attacks, and composability risks, how to audit cryptoeconomics. I'm not sure if the sound is okay, since I got an echo, but I hope you can sort this out in the background.
I do hear the echo as well.
The echo is there.
There's a huge echo. So I don't know. Give us a second to sort this out. Okay. It should be fine now, I hope. Okay. All right. Sorry for that. Attacks and composability risks, how to audit cryptoeconomics. And I'd like to welcome our panelists. First, Livshits. He's chief scientist at Brave Software and reader at Imperial College London, associate professor. Also, Thibauld Favre, CEO at Fairmint, and Gonçalo, co-founder and security researcher at ConsenSys Diligence. Welcome, everyone. And my name is Angela Kreitenweis. I'm co-founder of the Token Engineering Global Community, which you can find at tokenengineering.org. Some words on this community. The mission is to develop the theory, tools, and practice we need to build sustainable and successful Web3 economies. Token engineering is a cross-disciplinary field that draws from practices in systems, electrical, robotics, and controls engineering, and from behavioral and ecological economists, from finance, operations, research, AI, and optimization. And of course, we are observing closely what's going on in DeFi at the moment. And in the last couple of weeks have been pretty exciting, not only because of various product launches, but also because of incidents like Crypto Black Thursday or flash loan attacks. Such system failures are dangerous for the ecosystem, no doubt, but they can also help us to develop an economic engineering practice, and this is a positive development, which I have outlined in an article I share in the chat. And I'd also like to make you aware of the Q&As at the bottom, so just drop your message if you have any questions during the panel. Okay, so as mentioned, on the bright side of the recent DeFi attacks and exploits, we see an increasing awareness on how to more rigorously develop and audit such cryptoeconomic systems. And I've just picked some of the discussions in the community as an introduction. So on April 19, Gonçalo, you commented on an exploit of ERC-777 at the Land of Me hack. And on Money Legos, you said Lego blocks are safe, but Lego constructions are as safe as you make them. And you asked who should pay for such Lego constructions, composability audits. So should these be considered a public good? Which brought then Gitcoin to immediately open up a proposal for a Gitcoin grant round on DeFi composability audits. On May 12th, Gauntlet announced a new partnership with DeFi Pulse to provide understandable yet quantitatively rigorous risk analysis to the DeFi consumer as the market grows. And Messari stated recently, also commenting on the DeFirst Land of Me attack, this should continue the trend of security and economic audits being more rigorously demanded before any protocol can accrue a substantial amount of user funds. So these are just some of the voices that are promoting economic audits. And now I'd like to discuss with you this topic and start with Ben. Ben, you've published a paper in February, just I think 3 weeks before Crypto Black Thursday, called The Decentralized Financial Crisis, Attacking DeFi. First, what have been the main research questions that you've been trying to answer with this paper?
It's great to be here. And thanks for the introduction. I can also hear myself. Lego is still there. Look, now I think it's an exciting time to be in this space and to be in this field. I think we are starting to see kind of the next wave of maturation around DeFi protocols. We'll obviously talk about some of that going forward, but I think we wanted to ask a question about what it would take for a systemic contagion to emerge or to evolve in this space, somewhat inspired or akin to what we saw in 2008 and the 2008 centralized finance crisis. And we hypothesized quite correctly that a significant precipitous drop in the Ethereum price would be one of the triggers of this kind. And this is perhaps not the only one, but definitely is one of them. So the paper actually that you mentioned will be published, I think, sometime in July, if memory serves, as well, at the Crypto Valley conference, which I assume will be held online as well. But essentially, it's talking about the implications of these movements of ETH and implications on loans being held. And we actually, throughout the process of finishing up the paper, not at the beginning though, we were in touch with Maker, and I have to say that Maker was actually quite forthcoming and sensible throughout this process, which is not something one can take for granted, by the way, either. If you're doing security disclosures, not everybody likes you, let's say. But actually, they were very sensible. In fact, I think I'd like to believe, although I'm not sure that we have the evidence for that, that some of their governance decisions around that time were driven by some of the things we publicized as well. But it takes us, of course, to a number of bigger questions as to who's responsible and what's an audit. And given that this is, let's say, DeFi, we don't even know who the people are, aside from maybe a few handles on GitHub and maybe on Twitter. So the sense of responsibility is quite opaque, I'd say. And there is another problem, which is, for years, I'd say we were in a position where, we could say, I don't know, for a couple of years, you should audit your Solidity code, and so here are some of the common pitfalls, and maybe that's all good and well. It does catch a certain level of problems, but these are relatively low-level problems. It doesn't go after things that have to do with logic and larger scale, more global inter rather than intra protocol exploitation. And I think we're very much hitting that point, and very much with the mechanism of flash loans. We are seeing that with what happened to BZX. I think this is only the beginning, which of course poses a number of questions as to, who's responsible, because again, you have N protocols happily coexisting, and we can maybe say everything is well, and then N+1 comes along, and then all hell breaks loose. And is it the N+1 protocol, that one that is supposed to do something magical, and are they really capable to do that given the relative immaturity of some of the players in this space? Or is it the community as a whole? And what does that mean for DeFi? Should there be some form of self-governance that you mentioned, I think, or at least alluded to? So any number of questions, I think, opens up as a result of some of these attacks. And just like in the case of the two hacks, the Parity and the DAO hack back in the day, 3 years ago or something like that. I think that created a lot of interest, a lot of research, a lot of approaches coming out, and I think we haven't quite seen that just yet in this space, in part because it's so new.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Now, maybe to give an example, how have you explored the attacks you are outlining in your paper?
Well, so there is a number of techniques one can bring to bear on this, right? So in a certain wonderful sense, the majority of this stuff happens in the open. This is basically, if you're talking about contracts written on top of the EVM or in Solidity, let's say, this is like the ultimate open source. So in principle, one can say this is really a mecca for somebody who wants to do some form of analysis. Now, analysis techniques differ quite a bit. There we use the simulation-based approach, what's called stress testing, which is actually something that's inspired to a certain degree by what's done by central banks of countries like the UK as well as some others. So basically trying to stress test for certain extreme or uncommon conditions. And this is a fairly routine practice that is applied before various policies are implemented in CeFi. And this is like one of the first instances, or maybe the first instance of doing this in DeFi. Now, I should point out that this is obviously not the first thing, and like my bread and butter background, like what I studied for my PhD, is basically source code analysis. And here you have access to the source code. Now, some protocols attempt to obfuscate it. We can talk about the merits and demerits of obfuscating Solidity code or EVM code. It's a longer discussion, but let's ignore that for the moment. But in principle, if the code is there, you can do compositional analysis to see what combining this with that would give you. And in fact, one of the forthcoming papers we have in the pipeline right now, we just submitted it to a conference near you, which I'm not going to name, but it's really very much that code analysis kind of approach in an effort to understand what the various compositions of protocols yield. So you basically go back to the Lego-based approach that you mentioned at the top, I think, and try to reason about the implications of composing things. And you can do any number of things. So we use a theorem prover as our underlying engine for reasoning, but one can do, in principle, number of other things, whatever kind of works in some sense. But I think, despite that, I think the fundamental questions remain, which is like, who should do it, to what extent, to what degree, who is responsible, and other standards which over time can become introduced so that we don't have that systemic contagion outcome, which is what I started with, which is to say protocol N+1 basically kind of destroys the efforts, if you will, of the first N. Absolutely. Or poisons the well, right? I mean, essentially this kind of tragedy of the commons term comes to bear on some of this as well, which is to say, DeFi is happy-go-lucky, and this is actually a route to adoption for, for people who are reluctant about crypto, let's say, and there are plenty of people like that, obviously. Then, if they, read in the Wall Street Journal that, this is all for hackers and by hackers and, not to be trusted, blah, 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 then clearly it poisons the well and slows down the kind of positive forces that are here at play, obviously, as well.
So this is a perfect introduction for Gonçalo. Gonçalo, before we dive into the discussion who should pay for it, maybe you can give us a brief wrap-up how code audits look today, and also where you see the gaps when it comes to making sure that the economics are safe and that we clearly see sensitive areas and vulnerability.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for the invite, Angela. Following up on what Ben was saying, I do believe, and I agree 100% with everything was said, but I do believe that we live in two different sides of the same sphere. We coming from a place where living in a capitalist world and in a resource constrained company, we do have to focus less on research sometimes and on actually finding clients, right? This means that we have been faced with this problem many times before. When the BZX hack happened, it just came so evident that everybody started talking about it, right? Composability problems have always existed. One kind of recent example of that is actually Ben's co-authored paper on breaking the resource metering in the EVM, right? We were always building on top of layer one, right? So these things have always existed. It's not something new. We have just started seeing layering on top of layer two now, right? And that's why this is a hot topic now, and why the DeFi apps being built on top of each other have raised the same question again of who should pay for it. It's a hard question. As I say in my tweet, and I've talked about this many times since, it's a hard question. I don't have a clear answer for that. I don't think public funding mechanisms are exactly necessarily the right solution. And hopefully we will see a lot of advances in this area, right? As I said, there are many stakeholders of these systems that need to be engaged when the composability risks are assessed. We ourselves, we in ConsenSys Diligence, we have always focused on the code part, but it's funny to see how we've wore many hats at the request of projects that we have engaged with, right? Namely, doing some sort of economic modeling sometimes, maybe through agent-based testing. There's since the ecosystem itself is so new, it's so nascent, right? This means that the standards for risk assessment in security auditing or security reviewing are also very new, which means that sometimes when you engage with someone like us, right, someone that is maybe a little bit less focused on research than Ben in his teams, you kind of want us to wear those many hats, and we do end up doing some kind of economic assessment sometimes, some kind of like formal modeling. We do it all. And it's just as a way to try to mitigate this composability problems that may arise. It's also, since we're resource constrained, it's also hard. It's a hard lift for us to go back and assess composability risks over time, right? Because as Ben said, it's always that N+1, right? It's always the last one. It's that last drink that you have that caused all the evil that is about to materialize, right? And it's obviously very hard for us, being resource constrained, to keep analyzing composability risks over time, because it's not even an isolated thing in time, right? We have another axis, and we should also be preoccupied about that. It's very hard for us to do, but we make an effort to do so in a kind of like pro bono community directed effort.
Yeah, I totally agree that we at the moment don't have the standards established, and there are a lot of unknowns for the project. So you don't even know where to start and what are the right questions to ask. Now, I'm super happy to have Thibauld with us this morning, because it's really early morning at your place. Now, you are one of the founders. You founded Fairmint, and I guess you've launched in February, right?
Yeah. Yes,
and
we launched in March.
You did a really extensive cryptoeconomic research and simulations prior to launching Fairmint. Maybe first give us an overview what you have been doing and what was the motivation to do that.
Yes, so thanks for having me here. So Fairmint. So basically, we're using and we're helping companies use continuous financing to raise capital and turn their stakeholders into investors. And so if I say it in the crypto way now, we're using bonding curves to do capital formation and to help projects raise money. And so basically, Fairmint started like in November 2018 when we published the continuous organization white paper. And when you work with bonding curves, there's a lot of math involved. There's a lot of it's a really new model. And so I guess the first question and why we did an economical modeling was to answer and like, does it work? Like, because so far it was working in our head. We were sure it was working. But if somebody else would come to us and say, hey, like, how do you know it works? The only answer we had was like, yeah, because we have it in our head and it works. And so that's not sufficient. And so we wanted an external party to actually audit the system, model it, and prove that economically it was working. So that was first motivation. Second motivation, it was also like, as it's a new system, we needed to have like simulators and tools to be able to discuss with customers. Like if they ask us, okay, your system is great, but like, how much do you think I can raise? like what's going to be my cost of capital, what's going to be the return on investment for investors. So all these questions are important questions that need to be answered, and we cannot just say, hey, yeah, ballpark, it should be give or take. No, like you need to be serious about this. And so yeah, so that was the main reasons for which we decided to do this economical audit.
And can you tell us a little bit how it worked? I think you did it in parallel to your code audit, right?
Yes, so that was quite good. Like we worked actually so with ConsenSys Diligence. Hey guys, so we hired ConsenSys Diligence to do the code audit, and we worked with Block Science to do the economical audit. So I guess first one thing that is very I guess important to note is like the choice. Like how do you choose with who do economical audit, because it's not that common. Like we know the who are the best auditors in the place in terms of code, but in terms of economical audits, it's not that easy. And at first we contacted like the traditional economy economical audit players, but the problem we were facing is that when they were pitching us their tools, and their tools is all based on the quote unquote old economy, where basically like there's one buyer and then there's one seller, and so it's all like peer-to-peer type of economy. And when you're using bonding curve and automated market making mechanisms, well, you don't have this peer-to-peer interaction, right? Like you always trade against a smart contract. And so we are like, yeah, like it's a lot of money for something that doesn't seem to fit what we do. And this is when like we met with Block Science, and they were like, hey, yeah, like we're coming from a robotics background, but nothing to do. But here's why we think it's actually a great background to create an economical model for this type of contract. And they were right. And so like one of the first thing they did is like they model, like we have a circuit board of how a continuous security offering works. And we did, so once we had this, then we decided also to do in parallel with the code. And that was very interesting because the two were super complementary. So code-wise, one of the biggest issue you have with bonding curves is that bonding curves are infinite, right? And so as they're infinite, that means that you get to use pretty big numbers, and you do like power 2, power 3, so the numbers get very big, and you overflow or you underflow, and so that creates problem. And so our developer, who is great, like had created a library, for example, to deal with these numbers, and ConsenSys Diligence was like great at pinpointing. Like they basically created a unit test library for us, so that we know for sure that this library that our developer created was actually working in every cases, and if not, like what were the edge cases. But one thing that was super interesting is that like the Block Science team, on the other hand, they pointed bugs, not in the code obviously, but edge cases where, hey, you know, like your system might fail if this and this and this and this happen, right? And really things that are like corner case or edge cases that we would not have been able to see before. And so and what is funny, I don't know if you remember this, Gonçalo, but at one point, like when Block Science like point out this bug, and I shared it with you guys, you're like, wow, yeah, that is cool. That is cool because this is typically a bug. The code is working, like the code is fine, but the system was failing in one specific scenario, and so yeah, so that's how we approached it.
Gonçalo, you are smiling. Do you want to agree? Anything on that?
I can add. I think that's true. So what Thibauld just talked about is very true, and I think that we still haven't reached a place where economic failures of models and actual code vulnerabilities, because they're completely different classes of bugs, are being exploited together, right? We kind of saw that with BZX, kind of, but it's still it was still attributed, or I know that one of them was not, but it's still also debatable. But these flaws are still attributable to missing checks in code. So for me, they still fall under the code vulnerability category, right? Because our work as auditors is actually seeing mismatches in specification and implementation, right? So if there's a mismatch, then it was probably our job. The fact that like if us and block science started working together to attack different protocols, and as Ben said, like even inter-protocol stuff where we could exploit some economic model edge case on one side and then exploit like a code vulnerability on the other, then this is like next level type of composability risk, which are definitely not ready to tackle right now.
So, but I'd say, if I can come in for a second. Look, I mean, this next level is more or less upon us, and this is why. I mean, when it comes to exploitation, sometimes you have a situation where the attacker is able to, convert the exploit into eventual indirect financial gain. Here, the gain is very direct and very immediate. Like it can be within the same transaction. Things are genuinely anonymous, and that's in many ways a perfect crime. So such the disbalance of power, which is very common in attack versus defense, right, is even more amplified because there is a lot of upside for the clever attacker. It's the same old dilemma, right? So the attacker needs to just find one thing, the defender needs to plug all sorts of holes. So such, it's a bit of a, because the upside is so easily measurable and visible and attainable in many ways by the attacker, I'd say that, in many ways, this is getting us closer to a perfect crime than many other things, right? So I think we're in this for a while.
Yeah, and which is a typical problem in security engineering, no matter if it's blockchain or somewhere else. Now, Thibauld, let's sum up with.
Actually, sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, but I think I'd like to make this following point, which is, if we go back to vulnerabilities of the past, let's say something esoteric, like return-oriented programming. I don't know if you know about this, but it's a specific technique in binary exploitation. Mm-hmm. Took easily from 5 to 7 to maybe even 10 years from this being proposed, somewhat academically, if you will, to being the mainstream practice. Mm-hmm. Here, this transition happens much, much faster. Much, much faster. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Yeah. Thibauld, your final words. We discussed, would you open source your work on the economic side and the economic mechanisms? And what would be conditions to open sources and to share it to enable, let's say, others to benefit from it?
So first, it was not cheap at all. So before open sourcing it, let us build on it and really use it, because right now we use it as a competitive advantage, right? So the goal, I'm sure, like once basically what we want to reach is to be able to use these simulators and these models and create a website where everybody can actually use them and to simulate their system. And when we reach that point, after that, it would make more sense maybe to open source part of it. But yeah, right now, honestly, we're not asking all our smart contracts and everything is open source, because ultimately that's what the community needed, right? So the DXDAO just raised $1.3 million using our contracts, and we're super stoked about it, because basically the backstory of it is that Martin Koppelman from Gnosis was a huge fan from continuous financing since the beginning. And the guys from DXDAO came to us 2-3 months ago and saying, hey guys, can we reuse your smart contract? And we were like, hell yes, hell do it, just do it, because we invested a lot of money so that exactly they are open source so that the community can use it, and those contracts are super solid. They are audited economically, technically. They are specified, they are documented, they are 100% test coverage. So just do it. And so it took them literally 2-3 weeks to integrate them, and 2-3 weeks after they had a 1.3 million. Well, in ETH, it's like 5,000 ETH in the bank, and so. And the contracts are solid. It doesn't mean that they are like maybe we missed something and everybody here around missed something, but I think we did a great job at minimizing that risk.
Cool. I hope we will see more of that kind of collaboration in the future. Thank you all for joining. We are just at the beginning of economic audits, and I hope we see much more activity in this sector. Thank you all.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.